Hello, everyone. Good day, good afternoon, good evening, regardless of your time zone. We are delighted that you have taken this time to join us for this panel discussion. We have the good fortune of being the first virtual concurrent session at Women Deliver, and we have a brilliant opening plenary session for you. Wanted to let you know that simultaneous translation is available in French, English, and Spanish. So please use the language button at the bottom of your screen to select the language that you need. And to kick us off, to help us know who we are and where we hail from, please respond to this question using the word cloud. And that is, where are you joining this call from? Okay, can we queue up where we're from? Well, we have a lot of folks from the USA. We have, oh, look at that, queuing up, loading up some nice countries there, all over the place. Unsurprisingly, given that we're talking about the United States Supreme Court decision, we do have a large representation from the United States. So let's kick off and talk about today's discussion. So I am Dr. Herminia Palacio. I'm the president and the CEO of the Guttmacher Institute, a think tank that focuses on research and policy analysis for sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice around the world. When the United States Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade in June of 2022, June 24th of 2022 to be precise, they asserted that abortion in the United States is no longer a constitutional right. Those of us who engaged in this fight for abortion rights internationally were alarmed, disheartened, and many other adjectives. Not just about the negative impacts that this would have in the United States itself, but around the potential global reverberations around this very regressive decision. And as my colleagues here at Guttmacher wrote in an editorial that was published in the British Medical Journal just weeks after Roe fell, we were really concerned that the Dobbs decision, as it's come to know by its shorthand, that overturned Roe, would surface in at least three ways. One, it would certainly derail or slow down the trend towards liberalizing abortion laws in countries around the world. Even though 50 countries have expanded legal grounds for abortion this century, the United States joined only two other countries, now making three countries in the last century, that have curtailed the legal right to abortion. So it is a very dubious distinction indeed. Second, we were concerned that this would lead to increased efforts, both globally and in the United States, to persecute and prosecute people who seek or provide abortions that do not align with clinical guidelines and could cause harm by, again, this very regressive decision. This would have a very chilling effect on the provision of legal abortion and keep people from seeking them and from seeking safe abortion. Third, we're concerned that the ruling would boost movements around the world by engaging the fight against sexual and reproductive fights, that it would sort of give comfort to those who sought to oppress. So those are the three issues that the authors discussed in that paper. But the authors also expressed hope. They expressed hope that other forces would come to counter these negative global forces, forces such as the regional coordination of efforts that preserve and increase access to safe abortion, and a growing momentum towards liberalization of abortion laws, such as La Marea Verde, the green wave in Latin America. And we'll soon hear more details about this from our panelists in the next hour. We've now passed the first year anniversary of the Dobbs decision, and this panel allows us to take a pause, to stop and reflect on whether how these outcomes that these authors were concerned about a year ago have played themselves out. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to now turn to the meat of the issue and really introduce our impressive lineup of speakers and the topics that we'll cover. Kelly Baden is our first speaker. She's a vice president for public policy at the Guttmacher Institute, and she will describe what the Dobbs decision is and how some of the ways it has impacted the people in the US. Kemi Akinfaderin is the Chief Global Officer at Feminista. She will share a few findings from work that she and her colleagues have carried out on the impacts of the Dobbs decision across 4 countries. Susana Chavez is the Executive Secretary of the Latin American Consortium Against Insecure Abortion, or CLACAI for short. She will discuss some of the reactions to the US in Latin America. And Nelly Munyasia is the Executive Director of Reproductive Health Network in Kenya, the RHNK. She will tell us about a consortium that has taken shape in Sub-Saharan Africa and takes aim at conservative anti-rights forces, including Dobbs. We'll also hear from all of you as you ask questions along the way in which Dobbs shows up in your work. And we're going to be using some poll questions to keep it interactive, keep you engaged. You can feel free to submit your questions throughout the conversation. To make sure that you have time to hear from all the speakers, are going to take those questions at the end. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can, but we really look forward to all your thoughts and the things that you have to say. So our first poll question is, how well do you think sexual and reproductive health and rights stakeholders outside of the United States understand the US Supreme Court decision that ended Roe v. Wade, which was the 1973 decision that gave federal protection to abortion rights in the US? While you answer that question, we're going to be turning to Kelly Baden to begin our talk. So you will have time to answer the question, and we'll get to the results at the end of her presentation.
Thank you, Herminia. Hello, everybody. Wonderful to be here with you. Gilda, I think I'm ready for slides. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Such a delight to be with you all virtually. And I know some of you are together as well. Next slide, please. I think it's important, before I talk about the implications and the impact of the Dobbs decision just over a year ago, that I set the stage first about the abortion rights landscape in the US, even before Dobbs. Nope, go back one, please. Yes, thank you. So 1973's Roe v. Wade decision and 1992's Casey v. Planned Parenthood decision were the legal frameworks we were operating under for a long time in the US. They really created a tense framework that theoretically required a baseline of protection for abortion rights nationally in the US, but allowed for a vast array of restrictions and regulations to go into effect, even when those state-level abortion restrictions actually did impede access to abortion care for many people. And of course, specifically, people who are already marginalized by an unjust and racist healthcare system in the US were most impacted. But of course, in June 2022, the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health decision overturned nearly 50 years of that legal precedent. And the result has really been chaos and confusion. And it's important to note, as this chart shows, that even, again, under the Roe framework, so before the Dobbs decision, abortion was heavily restricted state after state, year after year. And the impacts of those restrictions, again, were really felt most by people with lower incomes, communities of color, and young people especially. So we like to say Roe v. Wade was critically important, and it was never enough to ensure true abortion access for all. Next slide, please. But of course, 1 year later, after that Dobbs decision, that landscape for legal abortion is very grim. 14 states have banned abortion entirely, some with very few exceptions on paper that are likely not met in reality. And you'll see here, this map is actually already outdated because there's been some action in the last few days around other state level abortion bans. And so I think that's a good sort of accidental but real illustration of how quickly things are still moving and how quickly the legal landscape continues to shift, which, as you can imagine, is very difficult for anybody who might be seeking or needing abortion care in various places throughout the US. So right now, more than 19 million women of reproductive age live in a state that has banned abortion and must either navigate a very complicated landscape to cross multiple state borders, as you can see with some of those deep red areas, to get to a state with legal abortion, or find a way to self-manage abortion on their own, or even continue a pregnancy that they didn't want to continue. Notably, in the US, of course, people have always traveled across state lines to access abortion care even before Dobbs. For example, Mississippi for a long time only had one abortion clinic available. But now there is some data from the last year showing that some states are seeing an increase in abortion provision, for example, Colorado, North Carolina, while other states, of course, have gone down to virtually zero, those states where abortion is banned. But however, the increases of in-clinic abortion provision in some of those states is not enough to offset the reduction of abortion availability in other states. So that does lead us to believe that there are people who are likely not getting the care that they need. I do want to flag the political blowback to the Dobbs decision was swift. Again, the decision was in June. In August, Kansas voters rejected a legislatively referred constitutional amendment on the ballot that would have removed protections for abortion from the state constitution. That was a huge victory in a state that many did not think an abortion rights win could happen. And then we had the midterm elections in November of last year, which also really showed a strong motivation from voters who care about abortion rights. And in many states, it was the #2 issue that turned them out to vote. And it did change the makeup of some of the state houses in some of these places, for example, Michigan and Minnesota, who were then this year able to enact some proactive protective measures for abortion rights. So right now, as I said, many states, over a dozen states, have abortion completely banned. And that happened right around the Dobbs decision with something called trigger bans, but then continued over the next few months. And then this year, we've seen a lot of other movement on abortion restrictions at various, especially early stages in pregnancy. You can see some examples here. South Carolina, Nebraska, North Carolina are all places where this happened. But again, there was a strong political blowback and a lot of activity and protest, really, again, demonstrating that the people do not want to see abortion bans. And that's the kind of momentum that we need to continue for months and years to come. And I will flag again that some states were able to enact strong proactive measures, but the result, of course, is that we really have this patchwork landscape of state-by-state access that is ever changing. Many of these laws are tied up in the court still, and that is very confusing for patients and really not ideal for anybody who cares about this issue. Next slide, please. So the Dobbs decision that overruled Roe v. Wade as wrongly decided also holds that the 14th Amendment's guarantee of liberty does not encompass an individual's right to abortion. And so the implications of this decision are far-reaching, and we are still discovering what those will be, certainly because our opponents of abortion will stop at nothing, and they will continue to push the envelope and see what is possible in this new legal landscape. So we really are just scratching the surface of what might come next. This will require a long-term, multifaceted effort, not just to win back basic legal protections for abortion, but also to think bigger and create a new vision for abortion rights and access for all. Again, calling back to that first slide where I showed the large number of state-by-state abortion restrictions that were legal, even under the Roe v. Wade framework. So I think my takeaway really is that we are in a very challenging moment. There are glimmers of hope with many strong and innovative state policies to protect and expand abortion rights and access. But for far too many people in the US right now, legal abortion is not available available to them easily, if at all. And we have a long road, multifaceted approach ahead of us to, again, not just win back what we had, but really think differently about how we can ensure abortion access for all. Thank you so much. I think, Herminia, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for setting that landscape. And now our poll results from the first question. All right, well, it seems that, almost 50% of folks feel that there's sufficient understanding of the Dobbs decision. So that, I think, bodes well as we're thinking about sort of the responses that people are doing regionally and in country to sort of mitigate against the influence of this very adverse US decision. So next, we have one more poll question before bringing on deck our next speaker. So are we bringing up polling question number 2? There we go. All right, question number 2. Have you seen Dobbs directly referenced in advocacy discourse or dialogue outside of the US? So as you think about that, I also want you to turn your attention to our next speaker, Kemi, who's really going to be talking about the research findings, some research findings on the impact of Dobbs. Kemi, over to you.
Thanks, Herminia. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, in whichever time zone you are in. I have the pleasure to present to you the findings of the global impact of Dobbs' decision on abortion laws, policies, narratives, and movements, findings from Colombia, India, and Kenya, and Nigeria. I know that many of you would be asking, but, the Dobbs decision is a domestic decision. It's one that affects only people that are living in the United States. So what does this have to do with the conversations globally? But we know, first of all, that the US government is one of the largest contributors to global health. And as part of his foreign policy and foreign assistance programs, provides a lot of resources to many countries, especially those in the global South, to support health systems and also to address many issues, including sexual reproductive health and rights. The second thing is that we do know that the US also has a bit of a soft power as well, and influence in terms of this work. And so many of these things have an opportunity. It could be positive, but it could also be negative. And we are seeing both cases in terms of the findings that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So really the aim was to look at the impact on these different elements, but it was also for us to better understand how is it that, organizations are responding as well. The 4 countries that were included in the studies basically also have different legal frameworks, a diverse framework in terms of their abortion laws. So going from Colombia with the recent win and being the most liberal, in India on one side, to Kenya and Nigeria, which has more restrictions in terms of access to legal abortion. I won't go into details in terms of methodology in the interest of time, but I'd be happy to share later on in the chat access to the preliminary findings reports for colleagues who might be interested in going into more depth on that. Next slide, please. So let's jump into the findings. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So when we did this research, we spoke to many different respondents that cut across governmental representatives, to civil society, to also some anti-rights actors as well. And one of the things that we saw in, for example, Kenya, when we spoke to respondents, was that many anti-abortion advocates were using Dobbs as a strategy for also advancing their case. As many of you might know, or maybe might not know, in May 2022, the High Court in Malindi affirmed abortion as a fundamental right under the Constitution of Kenya, citing various international laws on abortion, including Roe versus Wade. And following the overturn of Roe, the Dobbs decision, the opposition seized this opportunity to claim that the judge relied on a quote-unquote bad law. And in doing so, they successfully persuaded the Court of Appeal to agree to an application to a stay of implementation of the Malindi law and its policy directives that came out of that. So that was one example that we actually heard from respondents for Kenya at a national level, but also at a sub-national level. In Kisumu County, for example, we also heard that policymakers wanted to drop unsafe abortion as one of the key causes of maternal mortality, and questioned if this was the time for us to focus on safe abortion, or instead try to roll this back or block this, as the United States have been doing. And, you know, one of the things that came out, and one of the respondents mentioned to us, that the anti-abortion movement in Kenya specifically has been responding to the Dobbs ruling by saying that there is an excitement, and that if the US, as big as it is, as influential as it is, has been able to overturn Roe versus Wade, then it's going to be a walk in the park for us in Kenya. And these are some of the sentiments that are coming out in relation to this. In addition to what we were seeing in Kenya, I'm going to just shift a little bit to Nigeria. What we saw, that the Dobbs decision was used as an argument against the domestication of the safe termination of abortion for legal indication guidelines in Lagos State. So at a sub-national level in one state in Nigeria. And we saw that respondents were able to make the links between the Dobbs and anti-guideline mobilization. And this was happening at a time when Nigeria was undergoing political change, was going through elections. And so we saw a huge amount of mobilization by the Christian Association of Nigeria, led by the Catholic Church, pushing against the government putting in place this particular guidelines, which was developed by a wide range of stakeholders. And a couple of days after it was introduced, I think exactly about 4 or 5 days after it was introduced, the governor of Lagos withdrew the guideline. And this is in the context of a country where abortion is highly restricted, only in the case of saving a mother's life. So this was meant to be a guideline to support healthcare providers to be able to deliver services even within this exception or this particular ground. In India, we found something that was slightly different, a bit of a different story, in terms of we heard Dobbs being used and cited in a hearing on India's same-sex marriage Supreme Court process that's currently undergoing. So the Solicitor General referenced the Dobbs decision to argue against same-sex marriage, citing that the decision should be left to Parliament, similar to how the Dobbs decision was returned to the states in terms of abortion. But what we also heard and we saw and documented was that the Chief Justice at that time rebuked the citation, responding that we cannot cite Dobbs because we've gone beyond Dobbs here in India, and fortunately so. And we have to give credit to ourselves that we're far ahead than many Western countries, and I quote. And so you can see that the case is slightly different here in India, in which it was being referenced as an achievement, the progress that's been made, and the rollback being made in the United States as what it is, a rollback, and India being able to move forward. Overall, interviewees across Colombia, Kenya, and Nigeria reported that the Dobbs decision has built upon a recent foundation of anti-abortion mobilization that actually originated from the US through the implementation of the global gag rule. And as many of you know, this is a particular policy that was expanded upon under the Trump administration to restrict access. And interviewees attested the fact that the global gag rule weakened sexual and reproductive health rights and justice movements and strengthened the anti-rights movements. And the Dobbs decision did not just impact the United States programming related to or its commitment to advancing sexual and reproductive rights in terms of US foreign assistance. However, we did see that in Kenya and in Nigeria, policymakers had concerns and began to censor, in a way, from the inclusion of provision of safe abortion in line with national policies and guidelines and practice, in anticipation that a global gag rule could be reinstated in place because of this recent decision of Dobbs, well, 1-year-old now decision of Dobbs. Next slide, please. In terms of, we did mention that we looked at policy, and I just shared that with you. We also did look at the impact of Dobbs on narratives and public opinion. And I think that's really important when we're thinking about our work in terms of expanding access, but also ensuring constitutional rights, but also in terms of laws and policies. And what we saw that the Dobbs decision, I'm being told that you can't hear me. Is it better now? Can I have feedback?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I can hear you as well. Yeah. And people can use the closed captioning if for a while they lose the audio in order to not lose track of what you're saying.
Thank you so much, Gilda.
Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the things we heard was that the Dobbs decision also had impacts on narratives around colonialism and as well as national pride. In terms of colonialism, one of the things we heard in terms of all the 4 countries was the anti-rights movement picked and choose which anti-imperialist message that they would use. So generally, we saw that anti-rights actors use anti-colonial messages to argue that abortion, LGBTQI rights, assisted reproductive technology, and or comprehensive sexuality education are foreign influences intended to undermine moral, cultural sort of agendas, and it's part of a neo-colonial agenda. But at the same time, we also saw that anti-abortion networks also pointed to the rollback of abortion in the United States as a desired path to follow. So they just sort of like cherry-picked where would be best to use this narrative to be able to advance their agenda. But what we also saw, especially in the case of India and as well as Colombia, was that many people of influential people across these particular 2 countries made statements that the US, that their countries are actually doing much better than the United States and have a more favorable abortion policy or framework. And Dobbs was less impactful in terms of those particular countries, and actually provided an opportunity for sexual and reproductive health rights and justice advocates to be able to talk and to engage on abortion rights and to be able to at least foster the conversation. We saw this especially, like I said, in India, in which, for example, one respondent described the discourse as more of a gloating nationalism, that we're better than the United States. And then respondents in Colombia also mentioned the fact that, strengthening feminist movements in the region was a promising strategy to counteract the backlash against SRJ worldwide. And I know some of my other colleagues later on are going to speak into more details about the work in Latin America. Next slide, please. And the last thing I want to speak about is just sort of like the impacts of movements. Many anti-rights actors in all 4 countries felt, many respondents mentioned in all 4 countries that anti-rights movements were emboldened post the Dobbs decision, and that anti-abortion actors deepened their campaign of misinformation and reinforced anti-abortion narratives and ideology, pointing to Dobbs as a push that validated their position. In India, shortly after the decision, we did see the first March of Life taking place around the 51st anniversary of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. The press statement that came from that march quoted a spokesperson from the Right to Life UK, stating that it was an exciting time for pro-life movements, as we're seeing the ends of Roe versus Wade present an opportunity and a cause of hope, because it demonstrates that a country like India with such unjust laws can be overturned. On the other side, in terms of the sexual and reproductive justice movements, however, we did see that it provided opportunity for groups and advocates to talk, to raise awareness about their laws, but also to identify shortcomings and areas where things needed to be stepped up. In Colombia, many respondents mentioned about how it created space for them to work nationally, but also to work transnationally and across the region. And the last thing that I would say in relation to impacts on movements relates to funding. And I think it's a really critical one, in which many interviewees expressed concern regarding the potential decline in funding to support global abortion initiatives, and highlighted how donors in the US, as well as other countries where right-wing political victories had occurred, might shift their focus inwards to address the anti-rights movements within their own countries, and that there being a greater need, especially with the fear of maybe a reintroduction of the global gag rule, that we would then see more setbacks in terms of abortion rights globally. I know my time is up, and happy to speak to some of the recommendations in the report, but just wanted to give you all a little bit of a snippet into this. And like I said, we'll share more about the findings in the chat for you to read the full report. So back to you, Herminia.
Thank you so much, Kemi. That was a very rich presentation, and I know that our audience is going to be very engaged as they continue on to Susana's talk. But before we get to Susana's talk, here is the results of the poll question about, are you seeing some similar to what Kemi described? Are you seeing, and it's about, it's just under 50%. In this case, that are seeing Dobbs directly referenced in the policy discourse. So it'll be interesting to hear questions from our audience as we proceed. Next poll question. All right. Let's see. Do we have the... There we go. Is the Dobbs decision influencing abortion advocacy, or SRHR advocacy outside of the US? And to talk to us about her vantage point is Susana. Bienvenida, Susana.
Muchísimas gracias, Herminia.
Thank you, Herminia, and through you, the Guttmacher Institute, for opening up this debate that is key for the global agenda and enables us to share some thoughts from Latin America and the Caribbean. And I want to do it through CLACAI. I'm going to briefly introduce our work. We are activists, researchers, health service providers, and professionals that contribute to the reduction of unsafe abortion in Latin America. We strengthen the use of technology, safe technologies, respecting the human rights, and creating safe exchange spaces to strengthen national actions towards safe abortions and to strengthen the actions against unsafe abortion. Next slide, please. Can you show next slide? Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade, during its 40 years, was for our region a benchmark because it was one of the legal arguments underpinning the abortion rights, together with other benchmarks that we have been able to develop and that are more consistent with our legal frameworks and realities. In spite of all that, Roe versus Wade is a great loss for the movement, not only because our strategy that is being implemented in our countries to weaken the institutions that guarantee human rights, but also because it sends an awful message that the rights that we have earned are unsafe. And however, I want to point out that the overturning occurs at a different time in Latin America. And if this had happened only 15 years ago, today the landscape would be very different from the one we see on the slide. The Dobbs decision occurs in the midst of the progress in our region, but also in sustained fights to decriminalize that happened after a long silence, or more than 90 years, for safe abortion in the region. Before the lay in the city of Mexico, almost nothing had happened in our region in relation to the very few exceptions of non-punishable abortion that when included inside their criminal code, the abortion as a crime in 2007, where the federal district opened up a territory that is a dream for Latin America, followed by Uruguay, Argentina, and now Colombia. In only 16 years, we were able to transform that map, and based on our progress, we have improved standards for access to abortion, such as the Colombian case, as Kemi was saying, is one of the most liberal laws that we have. So we can say that the countries that where abortion was decriminalized have moved towards including more grounds, such as the case of Chile, or full decriminalization as Colombia, Uruguay, and after that Argentina. After 30 years fight and with many attempts to change legal matters in Congress, they decriminalized abortion legally and socially, and that is our green wave. Chile, Ecuador, and Bolivia expanded their grounds for non-punishable abortion, and we can say that the total ban is still in force in 3 countries where abortion is considered a murder, and women must serve long sentences, such as in Salvador, Honduras, and Dominican Republic. As you can see, in only 16 years, we transformed this landscape. However, we should not lose sight of the small details, and that can be seen when you analyze the different care standards, and we can analyze the internal inequalities within countries and that hinder or stop abortion from being affordable. The report is something that we can hand out for the people that are interested in it. And so, next slide, please. What have we done for this landscape to be transformed? I want to tell you that there's a regional movement for the rights to abortion. All countries, including those that have full bans, have been working hard that made the agenda visible, not only to change laws, but also force the citizenship to get engaged in our movement, and for abortion to not be a stigma for women that need an abortion. Unfortunately, the abortion debate is not a marginal one. It's included in all election process, and it's we have made incremental wins, and this is the result of many years of advocacy and evolution of our political frameworks, the rights of women and the rights of people with the ability to give birth. As you can see, it's not just a single campaign or act or just one strategy, but a very wide process, including not only the demands for legal changes in parliament or congresses, but also the prosecution of emblematic cases that enabled us to manifest our outrage and our claims for justice. There's also some legal and high impact processes that transform public policies. The case of Scale, Camila in Peru, Manuela and Beatriz in El Salvador, Esperancita in Dominican Republic and Paulina in Mexico. They are just some of the names that today have a place in international justice. Next slide, please. I'd like to conclude my presentation by telling you the lessons learned. I think that nothing is new, that what we have done in many parts of the world, but the idea to share it with you today is something that can unite us, not only as countries within a region, such as Latin America, but also as a continent, and I refer to the United States and Latin America. And we can also become a global movement. The need for a regional national movement that has access to safe abortion. The changes in abortion cannot be affected only by a specific group or people. We need this agenda to be included into the right of women equality, reproductive health and democracy. Abortion must be discussed as a key element occurring to women and people with the ability to give birth. Pregnancies cannot belong to institutions and let alone the state. The second point I want to raise is that we must ensure access, and it is today and not when laws changes. Even though laws are important, today women and people with the ability to give birth cannot wait. In all our legal frameworks, even those that ban abortion laws, there are rights, recognized rights, the rights for information and health in Latin America. The people supported the Solidarity Network, enabled women to have more information, but also achieved the reduction of abortion risks and make it affordable. And the main goal for these women is to show us that abortion can be self-managed, and currently there are many spaces where information can be found, schools, communities. And the third element is that we must ensure public access. In Latin America, we have learned that we need to demand the state their responsibility. This is not an easy task in a context of health, privatization, and mercantilism, but a fight for public services for abortion care. And this care must be included in the health subsidy. This implies fighting medicalization and including technologies such as teleabortion and included it in the primary health care. We have the directives of the WHO that provide standards that are relevant to us. The fourth aspect is that we need to embrace international justice for human rights. In many countries in the region, there are governments with huge democratic deficiencies or gaps that question their international human rights commitments. And so this makes us, this complicates matters, and we need to reduce our spaces in the inter-American system, or we have to come to the United Nations systems. This resulted in recommendations that are vital for us, that must be incorporated to use them as an advocacy mechanism. Finally, I want to point out the importance of monitoring and data. Data are key, and all of us work on them. Who has not used the information provided by Guttmacher institution? We know it is very valuable. Most of our countries have this type of data, but it's still not enough. And that is where we should work together. Many organizations are contributing local data through consultations or opinion polls and surveys. In CLACAI, we have driven two resources. One is reproductive health is vital. It's an enforcement mechanism for the state in terms of reproductive health and used to monitor health responses in 15 countries within the pandemics. And this enabled us to create an impact regionally and locally, and has enabled the states to show gaps in data, but also some best practices that or lessons that the countries need to learn. I thank the opportunity for sharing my thoughts in this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Susana, for that description of really all the progress that's happening and how it's happening in Latino America. And now we're going to turn over to Nelly to bring us home before we open the Q&A. And I want to remind our listeners that they can begin submitting their questions now. And as I said, we will get to as many questions as we can. Over to you, Nelly.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning from wherever you're listening us from. And just to start off, when we are talking about Dobbs' decision, the Malindi case involved one of our providers. I work for Reproductive Health Network Kenya, which is a network of healthcare providers working to ensure women, girls access abortion in Kenya. And the Malindi case was one of our providers' case, and the Dobbs v. Wade had been cited in the win of that case. And a month later, then we had the decision that was made. And in the wake of the ruling, we started coming together, informally asking ourselves tough questions. And this is because we are very much aware of what such pronunciations, decisions that are made in the USA, the kind of effects they have back here in Africa. And therefore, as we were asking ourselves questions and just wondering through the implications of this ruling beyond the US borders, and more importantly in Africa, we decided to quickly, in an informal way, form a consortium that was going to be bold and apologetic and Africa-led. And this is because we know that African women continue to die every day because of unsafe abortion, and this is one thing that really needs to be controlled. And we see a lot of our government borrowing a lot, from some of these decisions that have been made in the US and influencing the policy, the abortion policy environment in our country, Kenya, and across Africa as a region. So as we were just thinking through, how do we come together? What are the implications? Of course, there was the Malindi case that we definitely already were seeing the opposition going to court and asking for the reversal of the ruling. We already were seeing an emboldened opposition that was, coming out and citing it and saying that we have always said that abortion is illegal across the world, and we have just been, validated. And of course, there were the positives, the negatives. There was the new abortion law in Benin that was, again, a huge win. And of course, again, we see the opposition groups being funded, getting a lot of funding. And when we think about opposition groups getting funded, is they have very flexible funding that they're able to convene policy makers, they're able to put a piece on print media, they're able to, hold meetings and just have conversations that are seeking to, talk against abortion or, negatively, talk about organizations that are providing safe abortion services. Next slide, please. So as we continue just thinking together and coming up with a bold and apologetic African-led movement, we were very aware of what were the issues that faced us. We were very aware of how, organizations that work on abortion for the long time have not been coming together. And we were able to have consultative workshops. And just to mention that we were looking at African-led global connected movement. And this catalyst movement had the local organizations, at the center of it. And when I talk about local organizations, there are national organizations such as ourselves. And of course, we had other partners that then supported technical support and just financial support into putting this together, which included, of course, IPPF, IPAS, Center for Reproductive Rights, among others. So as we brought the movement together and we were just speaking to ourselves, and we were really, focused on organizations that only work around abortion. And we one thing that continued to come up, like I mentioned, is civil society organizations continue to work in silos. Then, of course, shrinking donor funds. And this is more specifically for work around abortion, access to safe abortion services. Implementation gaps between policy and delivery. And a lot of countries such as Kenya, you'll realize that there are policies, but these policies are not being implemented. And when it comes to, even building the capacity of providers, there are no clear policies that guide on how the training for healthcare providers should be done. Then civil society organizations also shared need to protect gains and expand access. We looked at countries that had already made some progressive, gains. Look at the Malindi case, for example, Benin. How do we ensure that we are protecting these gains? Because we know that the opposition is working very hard to take away these gains. So our role was to ensure that we are working towards protecting this and also ensuring that we expand access to these services, even if, and we appreciated that we had even self-care technology that allows for self-managed abortion. Then also battles that requires multi-sectoral collaboration. And at this, we were thinking of just not a multi-sectoral collaboration, but an intersectoral collaboration where we are building allyship and, collaboration beyond the traditional civil society organization, the traditional folks, and just, bringing other key actors, such as the judiciary, law enforcers, researchers to be part of the movement so that we are forming a wider net of allies. Then, we looked through and we were asking ourselves, what are the ingredients for success, or how does a successful movement look like? And we looked at collaborating at different levels in the system, and I've talked about that, working on supply and demand of legislation, policy design and service delivery. And this is just looking at what do we have in terms of policy? Where do we need pro bono legal support, for example, where we have young women being arrested for accessing abortion services? How do we make sure that we have lawyers available to provide pro bono legal support? And also in terms of service delivery, how do we make services available for that woman that is at the, grassroots, at the community, that is not even aware of what the Dobbs decision is, but is in need of these services and probably cannot even afford those services and will rely on organizations probably such as Reproductive Health Network Kenya to access these services. Then non-siloed research for knowledge sharing, evidence-based advocacy and accountability. And this ensuring that we are working very closely with organizations that are experts on research. We are lucky to have a PHRC that continues to do amazing work in collecting evidence and just ensuring that there is research and information that support our advocacy work, relying on the Guttmacher findings. And this is information that has been collected from our country. So how do we put this evidence together to support our advocacy work? Then we also looked at what is then the potential of this consortium. Of course, there's the coherence to drive change and mitigate opposition. And when we think about opposition, we do not want to be reactive, but have a long-term strategy on how do we engage opposition? How do we ensure that they are not taking away the gains that we've made? We are not giving them visibility. We are not allowing them to let women and girls die due to something that can be, prevented. Then learning, capacity sharing, and uptake of best practices, just appreciating, like we are saying, we are locally, it's a local movement, locally led movement, but globally connected. What are some of the best practices do we learn, for example, from Latin America, Asia, the countries that have been able to work on this and win? How do we get this information? How do we get experts to provide these best practices so that as a movement, we learn and we strengthen the movement? Then coordination, I mean, we realized that we needed coordination more than ever before because we needed to come together, we needed to speak together, and we needed leadership in bringing the organizations that work around safe abortion. Then, of course, funding. When we talk about all this, we realized that there needed to be funding, and we needed funding that is not limited, for example, to advocacy only or development of policy or services. We needed funding that is flexible to ensure that we are able to meet our needs as they come. Then inclusion, which was very important because, again, when opposition were fighting, they were not fighting abortion only. They were fighting comprehensive sexuality education. They were fighting LGBTQI. So for this catalyst consortium, we wanted an inclusive consortium that is then representing is representing all populations regardless of your sexual identity. Next, please. So quickly, these were some of the barriers and strategies outcomes, and I'll just quickly go through them. And barriers, these are things, some of them I've talked about, and these are things that we witness beyond Africa and across the globe. Disrupted access to quality abortion commodities and supplies during COVID. This is something that we saw, and we continue to see that. We continue to see medical abortion pills not being available, and where they are available, at times they're not available to the local woman that needs these services. And unfavorable values and attitudes of health workers. Again, we realize that this is a skill they require, and they're not all healthcare providers have this skill, have their values clarified for them to effectively provide these services. Then limited knowledge and of and access to abortion care, including self-care. We appreciate that self-care is relatively new, but we know that for it to effectively, to allow women and girls to access services, there must be enough information that is being passed to everyone that is involved in the ecosystem. Then, of course, a well-funded, emboldened, and organized opposition. Then abortion stigma and negative norms on gender equality and women's sexual and reproductive autonomy. Then fear of intimidation, harassment, and imprisonment. Immediately after the Dobbs decision, one of the things that was quickly seen was providers fearing that they would be harassed for providing abortion services. And of course, this is one thing that we continue to battle with as a consortium, and just realizing that we need to ensure that we build the confidence of the providers for them to be able to effectively provide these services. Then weak, disaligned, and unfavorable legislation and policies. We have countries where policies and guidelines do not speak to each other. Then lack of coherent and well-organized reproductive rights advocates, lack of commitment to national, regional, and international obligations. And we say that Africa as a region is very good at signing to commitments, but the implementing part of it is where we continue to see our governments not showing, full commitment towards it. Then there's no global central point for all learning, evidence, and best practices, especially on abortion. It tends to be hidden in sexual reproductive health. There's just no hub that purely purely talks about abortion information and all that. Then weak, insufficient mechanisms for generating, documenting, and using knowledge and learning. Then siloed approaches with little knowledge sharing among actors, no high impact practices on abortion care. So some of the strategies that as a consortium we have been using and we continue to use include integration of innovations in new models of care, such as digital health approaches and task sharing. And this helps take away the burden already from an already burdened healthcare system, just to ensure that women and girls can comfortably manage their abortions from the comfort of their homes. Then strengthen supply chain for abortion commodity, and then values clarification and attitude transformation and technical training for service providers, which is very key as we build a network of bold healthcare providers that continue to provide abortion. Then legal and psychosocial support and protection for service providers, values clarification and attitude transformation for community leaders and opinion leaders. We realize that for us to create a favorable environment for access to safe abortion, then meaningful engagement of the community and opinion leaders was very key towards us achieving an enabling environment. And therefore, values clarification as a training was very important. Then creation of winning narratives and influencer engagement, so that our story is told out there by people that are not, the usual culprits, but just having a broader, number of allies, including influencers that are telling our story. Then alliance building and opposition monitoring, then of course, targeted evidence-based advocacy, and then strengthening systems and skills competence for evidence generation. And then of course, collaborating with research institutions. So our outcomes, we are expecting that we'll have health providers as experts, health providers have expertise and capacity to deliver and promote access to quality abortion. Then we are using self-care, telemedicine, and other models of care so that women and girls have variety of options to accessing services. Then also critical mass of influencers are employing evidence-based interventions to shift social norms. And again, adoption of learnings from evidence generated to strengthen abortion care approaches. And in all this, of course, as I talk about this, we see what is the impact that we seek to see after all this. Of course, we want to see abortion included in self-care interventions. We want to see women and girls have improved knowledge and agency to seek and access abortion. We want to have an enabling environment for access to services. And most importantly, we want to see national and regional policies recognize and enable right to abortion care. And also marginalized women and girls, including women with disabilities, understanding their right to access to safe abortion services. Next, please. And I think that should be. Just go back. Just go back. Yeah, sorry about that. The second last, yeah. So I just want to kindly reiterate about our pillars. The second last slide. The next one.
So Nelly, since we're having a little bit of difficulty with the slides and we are sort of at time, I just wanted to, perhaps we can take down the slides. Nelly, thank you very much for that presentation, and silent applause, since we can't hear you, for all of our panelists for this incredible, robust discussion. We have been granted a little bit of time. Thank you by the organizers of Women Deliver to extend this conference a little bit, because we had some technical difficulties getting started. So we are going to be able to take just a couple of questions to make sure that there's an opportunity to hear more from our speakers, because I know that everybody's hungry for more knowledge. So one of the questions that has come in is, and this is to Nelly, actually, do you anticipate that there may be something similar to La Marea Verde, the green wave, coming in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Doctor. Sorry? Yeah, so thanks, Herminia. Definitely, definitely. And I say this because activists are tired, and it's gotten to a point where we want, you know, women to be allowed to access services, women to be allowed autonomy, to be allowed choices. So this is the time we are seeing actors coming together and just asking each other that we need to be speaking to each other. We need to work together. We need to hold our governments accountable. In the past, I think we've not seen this. We've seen organizations just work probably to meet the interest of the donors, but this time they are saying it's not about the donors, it's about the issues that we face as Africa. It's about the women and girls that continue to die because of unsafe abortion. So yes, I think it's just about time. It's cooking somewhere, and we should be able to see this.
Thank you. And I'm going to exercise a little bit of a moderator's privilege. Susana, I was struck by your very clear description that if the Dobbs decision had come down just 15 or 16 years earlier, the trajectory in Latin America would have been different. So first, I wanted so this is a question for all the panelists, but slightly different. So Susana, first, what are sort of the as you think about inflection points and how important they are there things that you would like other regions that are in fact inflection, that might be a different inflection points, lessons, little nuggets of wisdom that you might impart? And then Nelly and Kemi, as you think about sort of the inflection point that you are in regions and in countries in Africa, are there ways to sort of accelerate and sort of build tunnel under or take a bridge over? And then last but not least, if there's time, Kelly, if you could weigh in on what are some of the, as you've been listening to this presentation, what are some of the lessons that we can import in the United States from folks who've, made forward progress, and we're now the ones who are trying to sort of climb out from under, and what are the lessons that can go from other regions and countries to the US? So multi-pronged question, but I really wanted to hear from all of you a little bit more.
Y es una pregunta sumamente desafiante porque en realidad
Yours is a challenging question because there are many things included in these questions. The first thing I would say is that I have been fighting for abortion for 30 years, and I remembered when I started and where we are standing now. And today, we are in a position to say that there is a baseline in terms of legal framework and data that abortion must be a right. And when you fight for a right, you do it in a different way than placing it just as a public health issue or a need. It gains a new perspective, and this progress that we have made and the fight for abortion, it's cumulative, and it has to do with our wins in legal frameworks, and especially it's about holding governments accountable for its enforcement. This is a point, a common ground for all our movements.
Thank you. Kemi, over to you. What do you think, anything that sort of resonates with you about critical moments in time, and what does this Dobbs decision do for where you find your critical moment here?
Thanks so much, Herminia. So I think the African continent is at a critical time. I think it's a beautiful time. It might not necessarily be at the same pace in which my sister Susana might be at in terms of LAC, but the fact is that we have seen some progress, be it from Benin, as Nelly spoke to Sierra Leone, or to Cape Verde, or to Tunisia. And there are many more countries. South Africa, of course, has always had it for a while. And I think that this is a moment in time in which it would be great to look at how these different governments that have made progress come together to think also about a continental strategy to support others to start to think about how they can expand and liberalize their own laws. As we've seen in other countries, we saw it in Latin America, in which there was some level of exchange, not just only from feminist movements, but also from those responsible for public policy. But I also think that it's an opportunity to really invest in doing more narrative work, for people to understand why bodily autonomy is so important, why the public needs to understand why women's rights to choice, to decision, and to be able to make those decisions on their own body is important and part of our broader agenda for not just human rights, but for development, for health of our families, etc. And so that, for me, I think is an opportunity, and that we just need to invest more in terms of doing more work, because public narratives and public awareness can help to put pressure that can bring about legislative change. And we saw that in Latin America. That's what happened. There was movements, there was public pressure that brought those change, and we need to do more investment in terms of the African continent to make that happen. So thank you.
Thank you. And Nelly, you spoke so eloquently about the importance of collaboration and consortium. Are you feeling like in this particular moment, does Dobbs sort of strengthen that collaboration, weaken it, call it into question? What's your perspective from your place?
Thanks. And just like Kemi has said, this is the time we need to have cross-regional allyship, because I tend to believe that, for example, in Africa, the leadership tends to listen to each other. So for us, a civil society organization, partnerships, collaboration across the region, and taking, the best lessons learned or best practices, and just seeing how do we strengthen our local movements, but connect them to other movements within the region and across the globe. And like I mentioned, also intersectoral. So we stop looking for feminist movement alone, activists alone, but also allow for other non-traditional actors to be part of this movement. And we collectively as a movement across the region, hold our leadership accountable. Where they go for the AU meetings, we make sure that we are present and bringing in the narrative of access to safe abortion services is a right. It's not a favor, it's a right. And just citing some of the policies that exist within the countries, I know, for example, in Kenya, as much as it's restrictive, but I would say our constitution is progressive. And because we've had like 7 healthcare providers that have been arrested for the past 8 years, and all of them have been acquitted on the basis of our constitution. So really, I mean, we have some progressive tools that we can use to strengthen the movements and be able to hold our leadership accountable. So yes, this is the time for strengthening that interregional, movements.
Thank you. And Kelly, we are at a different inflection point in the United States. So how has what you've heard from your co-panelists sort of influenced the way you're thinking about sort of policy advocate on in this hodgepodge of states as you described at the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what a brilliant set of panelists to help demonstrate that what we have gotten wrong in the US is an over-reliance that the courts would do the right thing. And I think what we have missed is the people power. And we heard, Kemi just said that, public pressure. Nelly just mentioned going beyond traditional partners. And I think that is such a beautiful lesson that we can keep learning from the Green Wave and from others across the globe, because we sort of forgot about people power in the US. And now with a Trump presidency that has reshaped a judiciary for a generation, we have a long road ahead. That is not necessarily going to be our way out of this. And so it is about broadening the tent and kind of going back to basics of what democracy looks like and what advocacy looks like for the people on the ground.
Thank you. So another question that has come in from our audience really captures some of the comments that were made actually at the opening plenary session, as well as our session here. Many of you really highlighted the intersection between this rights, for the right for sexual and reproductive health and rights with and the anti-abortion movement and the links with the anti-LGBTQI movement. So I'm wondering if you can talk about our consortium and your areas aligning for sort of rights to sort of protect these kind of human rights more broadly. Is there alignment between the seeking the right to abortion and seeking the expanded rights for LGBTQI, and what's the role of LGBTQ people in the movement to expand the rights to abortion? And any of the panelists can jump in and take that. That wasn't directed specifically at any one person. Susana,
Yo diría que es, Yo diría que es una lucha indesligable, porque nuestras amenazas son comunes. Aquí lo que se está cuestionando es nuestra autonomía y la capacidad de tomar decisiones. En el movimiento LGTBI también enfrentan estos mismos aspectos y los enemigos, los que se oponen, son los mismos. Entonces, muchos de los fundamentos que justifican, que solidifican una postura del aborto, justamente nos permiten avanzar en este otro lado. Y el segundo aspecto es que nosotras también tenemos que generar este movimiento mucho más globalizador. Y lo quiero plantear, América Latina y Estados Unidos. Nosotros ya tenemos que hablar del continente americano, porque definitivamente son los nexos que tenemos que hacer para incluir a Estados Unidos, y Estados Unidos también tenga un tema de diálogo con América Latina.
Thank you. And I'm going to queue up the result from our last polling question, because apparently there's an interesting finding there. So a whopping 87% of our audience participation said that yes, that they see the Dobbs decision influencing abortion advocacy or SRHR advocacy more broadly outside of the US. And that could be influencing it positively and negatively. You can take down the slide. We are at time, and actually thankful to the Women Deliver Conference for really letting us have this robust conversation, even with the technical difficulties. I want to express my deepest appreciation for all of our panelists, Kemi, Kelly, Nelly, and Susana, in the order in which you appear on my screen. Thank you so much. I know that I learned an incredible amount, and I was inspired by your passion, by your commitment, by the progress that you are all making, because it is with that progress individually and collectively that we will in fact bend that long arc of history towards justice. So thank you all for joining us very much, and be safe and well. And I have had a little bit of laryngitis, and I think that the little frog in my throat is coinciding with the end of this conference, telling me we are at time. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. Merci beaucoup. Ciao.